Some people slowly disappear, but what Mark never expected was to discover that the wife he buried 1 year ago wasn't dead at all. She was alive. She had a new name, a new husband, a new child, and when she finally looked him in the eyes, she didn't scream. She didn't apologize. She said something that would destroy everything he thought he knew. I had to die to survive you. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you will never miss our interesting stories. And to my loyal family who has been rocking with us, drop your comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Delilah Harper was pronounced dead on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in late October. The police report said single vehicle accident. Her car had veered off Interstate 81, flipped twice, and caught fire. By the time emergency responders arrived, the body was unrecognizable. Dental records confirmed the identity. At least, that's what Mark was told. Mark Harper collapsed in the hospital hallway when the officer said the words, "We're sorry for your loss." They had been married 5 years. No kids, just the two of them, a modest home in Pennsylvania, and a marriage that looked stable from the outside. But stability can be a performance. The funeral was closed casket. Delilah's mother screamed so hard she fainted. Mark didn't cry. He stood there, frozen, staring at a wooden box that didn't feel real. Because some part of him knew something was wrong. People described Mark and Delilah as quiet. What they meant was controlled. Mark worked in logistics, long hours, precise schedules, numbers that had to line up perfectly. Delilah had once wanted to be a nurse. She dropped out halfway through her program after Mark told her, "Why waste money when I already provide?" At first, it sounded reasonable. Then it became everything. He controlled the finances. He controlled where they went, who they saw, how long they stayed. Mark never hit her, and that was the problem. Because when Delilah once whispered to her sister, "I think something's wrong," the response was always the same, "But he doesn't abuse you." What no one saw were the rules. Dinner had to be ready by 7 o'clock. The house had to be silent when he worked from home. She had to text back within 5 minutes. If she didn't, Mark didn't yell. He punished her with silence. Silence that felt like suffocation. 1 month before the accident, Delilah began doing something new. She started leaving the house alone. At first, it was just walks. Then errands that took longer than expected. Mark noticed. He always noticed. "You seem distracted lately," he said one night, eyes never leaving the TV. "I'm just tired," she replied. That was the truth, just not the whole truth. Delilah had met someone, not a lover, a lifeline. Her name was Renee, a social worker she met at a free clinic where Delilah had gone for anxiety attacks Mark didn't believe were real. Renee listened, and then she asked a question Delilah had never heard before. "Do you feel safe at home?" Delilah didn't answer, she cried. The plan took weeks. It involved lawyers, forged timelines, and a terrifying leap of faith. Renee connected Delilah with a domestic escape network. Not all abuse leaves bruises. Some erases identities. Delilah learned something shocking. In rare cases, legal death declarations can be manipulated when bodies are unidentifiable and records are altered by people willing to risk prison to save a life. Delilah hesitated, until the night Mark calmly told her, "If you ever leave me, I'll make sure no one believes you." That night, Delilah packed nothing. Because dead people don't need luggage. The car that burned on Interstate 81 wasn't Delilah's. It belonged to a woman who had already died of natural causes weeks earlier, unclaimed, undocumented, and tragically convenient. The fire did the rest. By the time Mark identified personal effects, there was nothing left to question. Delilah Harper ceased to exist, and Lena Brooks was born. Mark sold the house. People praised his strength. "He's healing," they said. What they didn't see was his obsession. He visited Delilah's grave every Sunday, not to mourn but to confirm. But 1 year later, while attending a logistics conference, Mark stopped at a grocery store off Route 23. And that's when he saw her with a child in her arms. Different hair, softer face, and a man beside her, his hand on her back. "Delilah, you're alive." Mark dropped his basket. The sound echoed. She turned. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Delilah didn't feel fear. She felt free. Because dead women don't owe explanations. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. The grocery store was loud. Scanner beeps, cartwheels, a baby crying somewhere near aisle 7. But for Mark, the sound collapsed into a dull ringing. Delilah, no, the woman who looked like Delilah, stood frozen with a carton of milk halfway to the conveyor belt. The man beside her instinctively shifted closer, his arm tightening around the child she was holding. "Lena," he said quietly. That name landed wrong. Mark took a step forward. Delilah, her shoulders stiffened. She didn't correct him. She didn't deny it. She just closed her eyes for a moment, like someone bracing for impact. Then she opened them and met his stare with something Mark had never seen on her face before. Certainty. "Sir, are you okay?" the cashier asked, glancing at the spilled basket on the floor. Mark ignored her. "Delilah," he said again, louder this time. "What is this?" The man beside her turned fully now. "Who are you?" he asked, voice calm but alert, the tone of someone used to protecting something precious. Delilah swallowed. "This isn't the place," she said quietly. Mark laughed. A sharp, broken sound. "You died," he said. "I buried you." People were staring now. Delilah adjusted the baby on her hip, a little boy, maybe 8 months old, dark curls, wide curious eyes. His child, Mark thought, the realization slamming into his chest. "I didn't die," she said. "I escaped." The word sliced through him. The store manager appeared, then security, then police. Mark welcomed it. Good, let them come. Let them explain how a dead woman was standing 10 feet in front of him. Delilah didn't resist when asked for ID. She handed over a driver's license. Lena Brooks, issued 8 months ago, clean and legal. The officer frowned. "Sir," he said to Mark, "do you know this woman?" "She's my wife," Mark said. "Or she was." The officer turned to Delilah. She nodded slowly. "I was married to him," she said. "Legally, I no longer exist under that name." The officer paused. "That's not how things usually work." "No," Delilah said softly. "But it is how survival works." At the station, Delilah asked for one thing before answering questions. "My husband." Mark almost laughed again. Her husband. But then the man from the store arrived. His name was Ethan Brooks. Former EMT, now a home inspector, married to Lena Brooks for 6 months. Father to Kayla Brooks. Ethan sat beside her, never letting go of her hand. "She told me everything," Ethan said to the detective. "Before we ever dated, before we married, I knew who she was." Mark felt something crack. "You knew she was legally dead?" Mark demanded. "Yes," Ethan said evenly. "And I knew why." Delilah asked the detective if Mark could stay. "Everything I'm about to say," she said, eyes never leaving Mark, "he needs to hear." She spoke calmly. No hysteria, no dramatics, just truth. She described the rules, the silence, the isolation, how Mark tracked her phone, controlled money, mocked her panic attacks, threatened her credibility. "I stopped being a person," she said. "I became a function." Mark shook his head. "That's not abuse," he said. "That's marriage." The detective didn't respond. Delilah leaned forward. "The night I realized I had to disappear," she said, "you told me no one would believe me if I ever spoke." She looked directly at him. "You were right. Here's the truth no one tells you. The law is slow, and it doesn't always know what to do with survivors who don't follow the script." Delilah didn't fake her death alone. She had help from people who knew the system's blind spots. The accident wasn't an accident, but it also wasn't murder. No crime scene tied to her. No fraud that could be easily proven. Her declared death had already been closed. Reopening it would expose failures no agency wanted public. The detective leaned back. "This is above my pay grade," he said. Mark stared. "So she just gets away with it?" Delilah answered him. "I didn't get away," she said. "I got free." The world Mark understood began collapsing. Friends stopped returning calls. When he told the story, people asked questions he'd never had to answer before. Why did she feel trapped? Why didn't she feel safe? Why didn't she tell anyone? And worst of all, why did everyone believe her? He wasn't arrested, but he wasn't vindicated either. He existed in a gray space, legally innocent, socially radioactive. Meanwhile, Delilah, Lena went home. To a house full of noise. A baby who reached for her. A husband who listened. 1 week later, Mark received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "Mark, I didn't disappear to hurt you. I disappeared because staying was killing me. You don't get closure. You don't get forgiveness. You get the truth. I'm alive. And I finally belong to myself. Delilah." Mark folded the letter carefully. Then tore it in half. Then again and again. Because the hardest thing to accept is that the person you thought you controlled chose to live without you. Mark Harper didn't want revenge. That's what he told his lawyer, anyway. What he wanted was recognition. Proof that he hadn't imagined his life. That his marriage had been real. That the woman he buried had stolen something from him. So he filed a civil lawsuit. Wrongful disappearance. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Fraud. Loss of consortium. The irony wasn't lost on the court clerk who stamped the papers. You can't sue a dead woman. But Delilah Harper wasn't dead. And Lena Brooks didn't legally exist at the time Mark married her. The case was accepted, and that's when everything changed. The story leaked within days. First local news, then national. Widowed husband discovers wife alive with new family. Talk shows debated it. Comment sections exploded. Some called Delilah a monster. Others called her a hero. But the one thing everyone agreed on, they wanted to hear her side. Delilah hadn't planned on speaking publicly. She hated cameras, but when a reporter found her old nursing school photo and plastered it online, she realized silence wasn't protection anymore. It was surrender. She chose a single interview. A long-form sit-down with a journalist known for survivor-centered reporting. No dramatics, no makeup. Just Delilah sitting in a quiet room, hands folded. I didn't fake my death because I was dramatic, she said. I did it because every other door was closed. She explained coercive control, how it erodes identity, how it doesn't look like abuse until it's too late. I wasn't running from Mark, she said. I was running toward a version of myself that was disappearing. The interview went viral, and suddenly, thousands of women were telling their own stories. What no one expected was Ethan. Up until now, he'd stayed silent. But Mark's lawsuit forced background checks. And that's when something surfaced. 10 years earlier, Ethan Brooks had testified in a domestic abuse case. Not as a defendant, as a first responder. He'd been the EMT who arrived too late to save a woman killed by her husband. The case haunted him. It was why he left emergency medicine. It was why he volunteered at shelters. And it was why, when Delilah told him who she really was on the third date, he didn't flinch. I believe you, he'd said. Because he'd seen what happens when no one does. The courtroom was packed. Mark sat stiff, composed. Delilah sat beside Ethan, her hand resting on his knee. Mark's lawyer painted him as a victim of psychological warfare. A grieving husband manipulated by an elaborate lie. Delilah's attorney didn't argue facts. She argued context. Expert witnesses explained coercive control. Psychologists testified that victims often feel escape is impossible without drastic action. Then Delilah took the stand. And for the first time, Mark couldn't interrupt her. She spoke slowly and carefully. When I died, she said, it was the first time in years I could breathe. The courtroom was silent. Mark believed this was his moment. He spoke about loneliness, about betrayal, about love, but when asked simple questions. Why did he monitor her phone? Why did she have no access to money? Why did she isolate from friends? His answers unraveled. I was protecting our marriage, he said. The judge didn't respond. The jury did, with their eyes. The jury ruled in Delilah's favor. No damages, no penalties, and no forced restoration of identity. The judge added something rare. This court recognizes that legality does not always equal justice, but in this case, they align. Mark left without looking back. Delilah cried, not because she won, but because the version of herself who had once believed escape was impossible had finally been heard. Mark Harper didn't lose everything in court. That came later. At first, life continued almost normally. He still had his job, his apartment, his routines, but something had shifted. People didn't argue with him anymore, they listened. And then they distanced themselves, silently. At work, conversations stopped when Mark entered rooms. His boss avoided eye contact. Clients requested reassignment. No accusations were made. No policies broken. Just an unspoken agreement that Mark Harper was complicated. One afternoon, HR called him in. This isn't about guilt, they said carefully. It's about optics. Mark resigned before they could finish. For the first time in his life, no one needed him. Freedom didn't feel like Delilah expected. It was loud, messy, and unpredictable. Caleb cried through the night. Ethan worked long hours. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, Delilah panicked. She felt guilty. Guilty that she survived when others didn't. Guilty that she had erased a version of herself her mother still mourned. Her therapist called it survivor's dissonance. You didn't choose the damage, she was told. You chose to live. But healing isn't linear. Delilah avoided mirrors. Not because she didn't recognize herself. But because she did. Some days, she missed the predictability of her old life. And that terrified her. Because missing captivity doesn't mean it was safe. It means it was familiar. Ethan noticed. One night, he asked gently, do you ever wish you hadn't disappeared? She thought for a long time. No, she said. But I wish it hadn't cost so much. Mark began writing. At first, letters, then journals. He documented everything, his perspective, his pain, his memories. He titled it, The Woman Who Lied. Publishers weren't interested, not because it wasn't compelling, but because readers didn't believe him. And worse, they saw themselves in Delilah. Mark drank more, he isolated. And for the first time, he felt what silence actually does to a person. One evening, Delilah received a call from a number she didn't recognize. It was Mark. Her hands shook. She considered hanging up, but she answered. I just wanted to hear your voice, he said. No, she replied. You wanted control again. Then something different. I don't know who I am without you, he admitted. Delilah closed her eyes. That's the problem, she said. The next day, Delilah filed a restraining order. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Mark wasn't violent, but he was still dangerous to her peace. When the order was granted, Mark sat alone in his apartment for hours. Staring at nothing, realizing too late that love isn't possession, and freedom isn't betrayal. Delilah had avoided this moment for over a year. Martha Harper still visited the cemetery every Sunday, still brought fresh flowers, still talked to a headstone that no longer made sense. Delilah watched from a distance one afternoon, sitting in her car across the street, heart pounding. Ethan squeezed her hand. "You don't owe anyone your pain," he said. "But she deserves the truth," Delilah whispered. They met at a quiet dinner just outside town. Martha arrived early. Now she is older and thinner, eyes permanently tired. When Delilah walked in, Martha looked up and froze. The coffee cup slipped from her hand. It shattered. "Delilah," she whispered. Delilah nodded. Her mother stood slowly, trembling, then reached out and touched her face like she might disappear. "You're alive," she said. Delilah cried for the first time in over a year. Martha listened to everything. The control, the fear, the disappearance. When Delilah finished, her mother didn't speak for a long time. "I loved him," Martha said finally. "I trusted him." "I know," Delilah replied. "So did I." Martha reached across the table and held her daughter's hands. "I wish I'd listened harder." That was forgiveness. Mark violated the restraining order once. Not by showing up, by sending a package. Inside was his journal, and a note. "I finally understand. I didn't lose you because you lied. I lost you because I never let you be free." Delilah returned it unopened through her lawyer. Some lessons have to echo unanswered. Time passed. Caleb grew. Delilah returned to school, nursing, this time on her own terms. She spoke occasionally at advocacy events, never using her old name. Not out of fear, but out of choice. Mark moved away. No one knows where. Some say he started over. Others say he never did. On a quiet evening, Delilah stood in her backyard. Caleb laughed inside. Ethan grilled dinner. The sun dipped low. She thought about the woman she once was. The woman who died. And the woman who lived. Some people disappeared to escape. Others disappeared to become. Delilah was never a ghost. She was a survivor. And this time, she stayed. Some stories don't end with justice. They end with truth. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is disappear long enough to finally come back alive. If staying means losing yourself, and leaving means becoming the villain, what would you choose? Was Delilah justified, or did she cross a line that can never be forgiven? Comment below.